Hey there, friends. We're back with American Miscellany. Here we are on page 324 of this grand old tome. It was published in 1865, and it's just a collection of essays, completely random subjects, historical and scientific subjects, by the way, but random subjects, random authors, random lengths. Our last essay was very short, just this wee little paragraph here. It was called SPQR. That was essay number 132. So let's go ahead and get into essay number 133, entitled Western Scenery. The traveler who first visits the Valley of the West, advancing from the east to the Ohio River, and thence proceeding westward, is struck with the magnificence of the vegetation which clothes the whole surface. The vast extent and gloomy grandeur of the forest, the gigantic size and venerable antiquity of the trees, the rankness of the weeds, the luxuriance and variety of the underbrush, the long vines that climbed the tops of the tallest branches, the parasites that hang in clusters from its boughs, the brilliancy of the foliage and the exuberance of the fruit, all show a land teeming with vegetable life. The forest is seen in its majesty. The pomp and pride of the wilderness is here. Here is nature unspoiled and silence undisturbed. This feels like an epitaph, like a gravestone. Okay. A few years ago, this impression was more striking than at present. For now, farms, villages, and even a few large towns are scattered over this region, diversifying its landscapes and breaking in upon the characteristic wildness of its scenery. Still, there are wide tracts remaining in a state of nature and displaying all the savage luxuriance which first attracted the pioneer. And upon a general survey, its features present at this day, to one accustomed only to thickly peopled countries, the same freshness of beauty and the immensity through rudeness of outline which we have been accustomed to associate with the landscape of the West. We know nothing more splendid than a western forest. There is a grandeur in the immense size of the trees, a richness in the coloring of the foliage superior to anything that is known in corresponding latitudes, a wildness and an unbroken stillness that attest the absence of man. Above all, there is a vastness, a boundless extent, an uninterrupted continuity of shade which prevents the attention from being distracted and allows the mind to itself and the imagination to realize the actual presence and true character of that which has burst upon it like a vivid dream. But when the traveler forsakes the Ohio and advances westward, and advancing westward, ascends to the level of that great plain which constitutes the surface of this region, he finds himself in an open champaign country, in a wilderness of meadows clad in grass and destitute of trees. The transition is as sudden as complete. Behind him are the most gigantic productions of the forest. Before him are the lonely, the verdant, the delicate inhabitants of the lawn. Behind him are gloom and chill. Before him are sunlight and graceful beauty. He has passed the rocky cliff, where the den of the rattlesnake is concealed, the marshes that set up fetid streams of desolating miasma, and the canebrake where the bear and the panther lurk. The canebrake where the bear and the panther lurk, and has reached the pasture where the deer is feeding, and the prairie flower displays its diversified hues. He has seen the wilderness in all its savage pomp and gloomy grandeur, arrayed in the terrors of barbarian state, but now beholds it in its festal garb, reposing in peace and surrounded by light, gaiety, and beauty. This distinction is not imaginary. No one can pass from one part of this region to another without observing the natural antithesis of which we are speaking, and that mind would be defective in its perception of the sublime and beautiful, which did not feel, as well as see, the effect of this singular contrast. There is in the appearance of one of our primitive forests a gloomy wildness that throws a cast of solemnity over the feelings, a something in the widespread solitude which suggests to the traveler that he is far from the habitations of man, alone in the companionship of his own thoughts and the presence of his God. But the prairie landscape awakens a different train of thought. Here light predominates instead of shade, and a variety of hue instead of a wearisome exuberance and monotony of verdure, while in the extent of the landscape allows the eye to roam abroad and the imagination to expand over an endless diversity of agreeable objects. The remarkable contrast is equally striking in the contour of the surface, in the difference between the broken and the level districts. If the traveler looks down from the western pinnacles of the Alleghany, he beholds a region beautifully diversified with hill and dale, and intersected with rapid streams. In western Pennsylvania, Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee, he finds every variety of scenic beauty: the hill, the plain, the valley, the rocky cliff, the secluded dell, the clear fountain, and the rivulet dashing headlong over its bed of rock. The rivers have each their characteristic scenery. The Monongahela, winding through a mountainous country overhung with precipices and shadowed by heavy forests, with a current sufficiently gentle to be easily navigable to steamboats, has its particular features, which are instantly lost when the traveler has passed on the bosom of the Ohio. The winding course and picturesque scenery of the Ohio between Pittsburgh and Wheeling impress the beholders as strictly wild and beautiful. Below the latter place, the feature of the landscape becomes softened. The hills recede further from the river, are lofty and more rounded, and again, after passing Louisville, these elevations are seen less frequently and gradually melt away until the river becomes margined by low shores and one continuous line of unbroken forests. But if we leave the gentle current of the Ohio and ascend the Kentucky or the Cumberland, we again find rapid streams overhung with precipices and a country abounding in the diversities of a wild and picturesque scenery. Here may be seen the rapid current foaming and eddying over beds of rock, and the tall peak towering over in solitary grandeur. Here the curious traveler may penetrate the gloom of the cavern, may clamber over precipices, or refresh himself from the crystal fountain bursting from the bosom of the rock. But he will find every hill clad with timber, every valley teeming with vegetation, even the crevices of the limestone parapets giving sustenances to trees and bushes. The scenery presented on the western shore of the Ohio is altogether different. The mountain, the rock, the precipice, and the limpid torrent are seen no more, and the traveler, as he wanders successfully over the Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, and the vast wilderness lying beyond, is astonished at the immensity of the great plain, the regularity of its surface, and the richness, the verdure, the beauty of its widespread meadows. It is perhaps not easy to account for the intense curiosity and surprise which have been universally excited by the existence of these plains, for they have been found in various parts of the world. The steppes of Asia, the pampas of South America, and the deserts of Africa are alike destitute of timber, but they have existed from different causes, and while one has been found too arid and sterile to give birth to vegetation, and another snow-clad and inhospitable, others exist in temperate climates and exhibit amazing fertility of soil. These facts show that there are various causes inimical to the growth of trees, and the forest is not necessarily the spontaneous product of the earth and its natural covering. Wherever its surface is left uncultivated by the hand of man. The vegetable kingdom embraces an infinite variety of plants, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that groweth on the wall. And the plan of nature, in which there is no miscalculation, has provided that there shall be a necessary concatenation of circumstances. That's a new word. A necessary concatenation of circumstances, the proper adaptation of soil, climate, moisture, of natural and secondary causes to produce and to protect each, just as she has assigned the wilderness to the Indian, the rich pasture to the grazing herd, and the Alps to the mountain goat. We apprehend that the intense astonishment with which the American pioneers first beheld a prairie, and which we all feel in gazing over those singularly beautiful plains, is the result of association. The adventurers who preceded us from the Champagne districts of France have left no record of any such surprise. On the contrary, they discovered in these flowery meadows something that reminded them of home, and their sprightly imaginations at once suggested that nothing was wanted but the vineyard, the peasant's cottage, and the stately chateau to render the resemblance complete. But our immediate ancestors came from lands covered with wood, and in their minds the idea of a wilderness was indissolubly connected with that of a forest. They had settled in woods upon the shores of the Atlantic, and there their ideas of a new country had been formed. As they proceeded to the west, they found the shadows of heavy foliage deepening upon their path, and the luxuriant forest becoming at every step more stately and intense, deepening the impression that as they receded from civilization, the woodland must continue to accumulate the gloom of its savage and silent grandeur around them, until suddenly the glories of the prairie burst upon their enraptured gaze with its widely extended landscape, its verdure, its flowers, its picturesque groves, and all its exquisite variety of mellow shade and sunny light. Had our English ancestors, on the other hand, first settled on the plains of Missouri and Illinois, and the tide of immigration were now setting toward the forests of Ohio and Kentucky, climbing the rocky barriers of the Allegheny Ridge and pouring itself down upon the wooded shores of the Atlantic, the question would not be asked how the western plains became denuded of timber, but by what miracle of Providence a vast region had been clothed with so much regularity with the most splendid and gigantic productions of nature, and preserved through whole centuries from the devastations of the frost and fire, the hurricane and flood, just to meet men. We have all remarked how simple and how rapid is the process of rearing the annual flower, or the more hardy varieties of grass, and with what ease a spot of ground may be covered with a carpet of verdure. And we know equally well how difficult it is to rear an orchard or a grove, and how numerous are the accidents which assail a tree. An expanse of natural meadow is not therefore so much an object of curiosity as a continuous forest. the former coming rapidly to perfection, with but a few enemies to assail it, the latter advancing slowly to maturity, surrounded by dangers. Yet we have no problem destroying it. Hence there is to my mind no scene so imposing, none which awakens sensations of such admiration and solemnity, as the forest standing in its aboriginal integrity, and bearing the indisputable marks of antiquity, where we stand upon a soil composed of vegetable mold, which can have only been produced by the undisturbed accumulation of ages, and beheld around us the healthful and gigantic trees, whose immense shafts have been increasing in size for centuries, and which have stood that whole time exposed to the lightning, the wind, and the frost, and to the depredations of the insect and the brute. The scenery of the prairie country excites a different feeling. The novelty is striking and never fails to cause an exclamation of surprise. The extent of the prospect is exhilarating. The verdure and the flowers are beautiful, and the absence of shade and consequent appearance of a profusion of light produces a gaiety which animates the beholder. It is necessary to explain that these plains, although preserving a general level in respect to the whole country, are yet in themselves not flat, but exhibit a graceful waving surface, swelling and sinking with an easy slope and fully rounded outline, equally avoiding the unmeaning horizontal surface and the interruption of abrupt or angular elevations. It is that surface which, in the expressive language of the country, is called rolling, and which has been said to resemble the long, heavy swell of the oceans when its waves are subsiding to rest after the agitation of a storm. It is to be remarked also that the prairie is almost always elevated in the center, so that in advancing into it from either side you see before you only the plain, with its curved outline marked upon the sky and forming the horizon. But on reaching the highest point, you look around upon the whole of the vast scene. The attraction of the prairie consists in its extent, its carpet of verdure and flowers, its undulating surface, its groves, and the fringe of timber by which it is surrounded. Of all these, the latter is the most exquisite feature. It is that which gives character to the landscape, which imparts the shape and marks the boundary of the plain. If the prairie be small, its greatest beauty consists in the vicinity of the surrounding margin of woodland, which resembles the shore of a lake, indented with deep vistas like bays and inlets, and throwing out long points like capes and headlands, which occasionally these points approach so close on either hand that the traveler passes through a narrow avenue or strait, where the shadows of the woodland fall upon his path, and then again emerges into another prairie. Where the plain is large, the forest outline is seen in the far perspective like the dim shore when beheld at a distance from the ocean. The eye sometimes roams over the green meadow without discovering a tree, a shrub, or any object in the immense expanse, but the wilderness of grass and flowers, while at another time the prospect is enlivened by the groves, which are seen interspersed like islands, or the solitary tree which stands alone in the blooming desert. If it be in the spring of the year, and the young grass has just covered the ground with a carpet of delicate green, and especially if the sun is just rising from behind a distant swell of the plain and glittering upon the dewdrops, no scene can be more lovely to the eye. The deer is seen grazing quietly upon the plain, the bee is on the wing, the wolf with its tail dropped is sneaking away to his covert with the felon tread of one who is conscious that he has disturbed the peace of nature, and the grouse, feeding in flocks or in pairs like the domestic fowl, cover the whole surface. The males strutting and erecting their plumage like a peacock, and uttering a long, loud, mournful note, something like the cooing of the dove, but resembling still more the sound produced by passing a rough finger boldly over the surface of a tambourine. The number of these birds is astonishing. The number of these birds was astonishing. The plain is covered with them in every direction, and when they have been driven from the ground by a deep snow, we have seen thousands, or more properly tens of thousands, thickly clustered in the tops of the trees surrounding the prairie. They do not retire as the country becomes settled, but continue to lurk in the tall grass around the newly made farms, and we have sometimes seen them mingled with the domestic fowls at a short distance from the farmer's door. They will eat and even thrive when confined in a coop, and may undoubtedly become domesticated. When the eye roves off from the green plain to the groves or points of timber, these also are found to be at this season robed in the most attractive hues. The rich undergrowth is in full bloom. The red butt, the dogwood, the crab apple, the wild plum, the cherry, the rose are abundant in all rich lands, and the grapevine, though its bloom is unseen, fills the air with fragrance. The variety of the wild fruit and flowering shrubs is great, and such the profusion of the blossoms with which they are bowed down that the eye is regaled almost to satiety. The gaiety of the prairie, its embellishments, and the absence of the gloom and savage wildness of the forest all contribute to dispel the feeling of lonesomeness which usually creeps over the mind of the solitary traveler in the wilderness. Though he may not see a house nor a human being, and is conscious that he is far from the habitations of man, he can scarcely divest himself of the idea that he is traveling through scenes embellished by the hand of art. The flowers, so fragile, so delicate, and so ornamental, seem to have been tastefully disposed to adorn the scene. The groves and clumps of trees appear to have been scattered over the lawn to beautify the landscape, and it is not easy to avoid that decision of the fancy which persuades the beholder that such scenery has been created to gratify the refined taste of civilized man. Europeans are often reminded of the resemblance of this scenery to that of the extensive parks of noblemen which they have been accustomed to admire in the Old World. The lawn, the avenue, the grove, the copse, which are there produced by art, are here produced by nature, a splendid specimen of massy architecture, and the distant view of villages are alone wanting to render the similitude complete. In the summer, the prairie is covered with long coarse grass, which soon assumes a golden hue, and waves in the wind like a ripe harvest. Those who have not a personal knowledge of the subject would be deceived by the accounts which are published of the heights of the grass. It is seldom so tall as travelers have represented, nor does it attain its highest growth in the richest soil. In the low, wet prairies, where the substrata of clay lies near the surface, the center or main stem of this grass, which bears the seed, acquires great thickness and shoots up to the height of 8 or 9 feet, throwing out a few short coarse leaves or blades, and the traveler often finds it higher than his head as he rides through it on horseback. The plants, although numerous and standing close together, appear to grow singly and unconnected, the whole force of the vegetative power expanding itself upward. But in the rich undulating prairies, the grass is finer, with less of stalk, and a greater profusion of leaves. The roots spread and interweave so as to form a compact, even sod, and the blades expand into a close, thick sward, which is seldom more than 18 inches high, and often less, until late in the season when the seed-bearing stem shoots up. The first coat of grass is mingled with small flowers, the violet, the bloom of the strawberry, and others of the most minute and delicate texture. As the grass increases in size, these disappear, and others, taller and more gaudy, display their brilliant colors upon the green surface, and still later a larger and yet coarser succession rises with the rising tide of verdure. A fanciful writer asserts that the prevalent color of the prairie flowers is in the spring a bluish purple, in the midsummer red, and in the autumn yellow. This is one of the notions that people get who study nature by the fireside. The truth is that the whole of the surface of these beautiful plains is clad throughout the season of verdure with every imaginable variety of color, from grave to gay. It is impossible to conceive a more infinite diversity or a richer profusion of hues, or to detect any predominating tint except the green, which forms the beautiful ground and relieves the exquisite brilliancy of all the others. The only changes of color observed at the different seasons arise from the circumstance that in the spring the flowers are small and the colors delicate. As the heat becomes more ardent, a hardier race appears, the flowers attain a greater size, and the hue deepens, and still later a succession of coarser plants rise above the tall grass, throwing out larger and gaudier flowers. As the season advances from spring to midsummer, the individual flower becomes less beautiful when closely inspected, but the landscape is far more variegated, rich, and glowing. In the winter, the prairies present a gloomy and desolate scene. The fire has passed over them and consumed every vegetable substance, leaving the soil bare and the surface perfectly black. The graceful waving outline which was so attractive to the eye when clad in green is now disrobed of all its ornaments, its fragrance, its notes of joy, and the graces of its landscape have all vanished, and the bosom of the cold earth, scorched and discolored, is alone visible. The wind sighs mournfully over the black plain, but there is no object to be moved by its influence, not a tree to wave its long arm in the blast, nor a reed to bend its fragile stem, not a leaf, nor even a blade of grass to tremble in the breeze. There is nothing to be seen but the cold, dead earth, and the bare mound which move not, and the traveler, with a singular sensation, almost of awe, feels the blast rushing over him, while not an object visible to the eye is seen to stir. Accustomed as the mind is to associate with the action of the wind its operation upon surrounding objects, and to see nature bowing and trembling, and the fragments of matter mounting upon the wind as the storm passes, there is a novel effect produced on the mind of one who feels the current of air rolling heavily over him while nothing moves around.